Scott Adams created the idea of one screen, two films. I'm creating the idea of one law,
two systems.
Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and this is Winnie the Westie. There is an update in the Ashli Babbitt shooting. Apparently her family has announced that they are going to sue the DC police for upwards of $10 million for the wrongful death and civil rights violations of Ashli Babbitt. From Newsweek, U.S. Capitol Police to be sued for $10 million for killing unarmed rioter. The family of Ashli Babbitt, the only person shot during the Jan 6 riot at the U.S. Capitol, plans to sue the U.S. Capitol Police Department and the officer who shot her for at least $10 million, their attorney said. The civil suit will follow a decision by federal prosecutors not to seek criminal charges against a plainclothes police lieutenant who single-shot killed Babbitt, who was unarmed. Now, I just want to open a parenthesis right now just to say that the New York Times really is trash. In my humble opinion, the New York Times is pure trash. In the wake of the January 6th riot, the New York Times were saying how 5 or 6 people were killed during those riots, how an officer, Brian Sicknick, was killed after being struck in the head with a fire extinguisher. It was later revealed that Brian Sicknick died of natural causes and the 5 other people died of medical emergencies. The only person who was killed during the January 6th riots was Ashli Babbitt, shot by a plainclothes officer at point-blank range. And despite running that knowingly bunk story about how Brian Sicknick was killed, despite exploiting his death for maximum political value, the New York Times has yet to issue a retraction or a correction. The only person who was actually killed during the January 6th riots was an unarmed protester by a plainclothes officer shot point blank. Alright, New York Times is trash. Closing the parentheses, back to the article. Babbitt, a decorated U.S. Air Force Gulf War veteran, was struck in the shoulder while attempting to illegally enter the Speaker's lobby, an area near the House floor, through a smashed window beside a barricaded door. It is unclear whether she heard shouted warnings over the crowd around her before she climbed within view of the lieutenant, who drew his gun and fired. The article then goes on to describe the incident. We don't need to go over that. I'm sure a lot of you out there have already seen the video. It truly is a terrible video to watch. But the article then goes on to say that not only were charges not brought against this officer hasn't even been publicly identified. Compare that to other situations involving the police. And when it comes to justifying the basis for the lawsuit, the attorney for Ashli Babbitt's family has the following things to say. Quote, "A rookie police officer would not have shot this woman," end quote, Roberts told Zenger News. Quote, "If she committed any crime by going through the window and into the Speaker's lobby, it would have been trespassing, some misdemeanor crime. All a rookie cop would have had done is arrest her," end quote. Quote, "And he has plenty of other officers there to assist with the arrest," end quote, he said of the shooter. Quote, "You had officers on Ashli's side of the door in riot gear and holding submachine guns. And on the other side of the door you have another uniformed officer 6 or 8 feet away. Whose life is he saving by shooting her? She's not brandishing a weapon, she's on the window ledge, and there's no reason to think she's armed," end quote. Now, this is not a question of victim blaming, and there is no but about it. It's just a matter of fact that when you engage in certain behavior involving the police, you increase your likelihood of having an adverse response from those police, but that's not to say that any adverse response from the police is necessarily justified or proportionate. If you resist arrest, if you refuse to comply with an officer's orders, if you try to break through a door into an area where you know politicians are somewhere in the back, you are increasing the likelihood of an adverse response from the police. But that adverse response nonetheless has to be justified and proportionate, and unless that officer thought that Ashli Babbitt had something extremely bad in her backpack, the question is going to be whether or not shooting her at point blank range when she is clearly visibly unarmed, at the very least in her 2 hands, is justified and proportionate. Now, there has been an investigation as to whether or not that officer responded appropriately as relates to criminal charges, and lo and behold, after an internal investigation, they have concluded that they did nothing wrong, but that still leaves the possibility of civil remedies on the table. Roberts said economic losses from the 35-year-old's death would likely total $2 million. Non-economic claims such as punitive damages would push the sum far higher. $10 million is, quote, "a good estimate," end quote, he said. Wrongful death lawsuits face no practical monetary limit under District of Columbia law. Now, there may be no monetary limit to lawsuits in the District of Columbia, but there are certainly going to be some legal limitations to the lawsuit. One of those limitations is going to be a concept known as qualified immunity. The police lieutenant might assert, quote, "qualified immunity," end quote, in an attempt to shield his personal assets from any damages a court might award. But, quote, "I don't know how on earth he could. understood. This is a clear case of excessive force, end quote, Roberts said. Law enforcement officers in the U.S. cannot assert qualified immunity protection in cases where victims or their estates prove their rights were, quote, clearly established, end quote, at the time of an incident. Bearing in mind that Ashli Babbitt's family's attorney represents the family's interest, and sure, that is going to be his position, but I don't think that qualified immunity is a non-starter in this case. I actually think, based on my limited understanding as a Quebec attorney, that the qualified immunity is going to be the biggest hurdle to overcome. And I will explain why I believe that a little later in this vlog, but for now there are also some procedural hurdles that Ashli Babbitt's family is going to have to overcome. Pressing Babbitt's family's claim will not be quick or easy, he said. U.S. Capitol Police is a legislative branch federal agency overseen by the Committee on House Administration chaired by Rep. Zoe Lofgren. That narrows the family's legal options. Under the Federal Tort Claims Act, a government agency accused of wrongdoing must have 6 months to investigate and decide whether to offer a settlement. Unless the agency waives that period of administrative review, Roberts said, he can't go to court until at least the end of October. The article then goes on to explain why criminal charges were not brought against the as-of-yet unnamed officer who shot Ashli Babbitt. The U.S. Department of Justice said in an April 14 press release that it had closed its investigation into the shooting without filing criminal charges. Quote, prosecutors would have to prove not only that the officer used force that was constitutionally unreasonable, but that the officer did so willfully, which the Supreme Court has interpreted to mean that the officer acted with a bad purpose to disregard the law, end quote, according to the agency. The press release said the investigation, quote, revealed no evidence to establish that at the time the officer fired a single shot at Miss Babbitt, the officer did not reasonably believe that it was necessary to do so in self-defense or defense of the members of Congress and others evacuating the House chamber, end quote. The article ends by listing Ashli Babbitt's awards and decorations, and I think it's a good thing for the rest of the world to know as well. Babbitt's awards and decorations, according to the U.S. Air Force, included the National Defense Service Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with M device, signifying military mobilization, Air Force Expeditionary Service Ribbon with gold border, signifying active combat, Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, and Air Force Reserve Meritorious Service Medal. To the extent that Ashli Babbitt's family sues for damages, I think the biggest issue is going to be that of qualified immunity, and I don't know if they're going to be able to get past that threshold, but you need to know what qualified immunity is first. According to the Institute for Justice, what is qualified immunity? Quote, qualified immunity, end quote, is a special protection for government workers that the Supreme Court created in 1982 as an act of judicial policymaking. The case, Harlow versus Fitzgerald, did not even involve police. It was brought by a whistleblower who wanted to sue Nixon White House aides for punishing him because he spoke out against a Pentagon weapons program. In Harlow, the Supreme Court made all government workers immune from constitutional liability by default. Under qualified immunity, government workers can only be held accountable for violating someone's rights if a court has previously ruled that it was, quote, clearly established, end quote, those precise actions were unconstitutional. If no such decision exists, or it exists but just in another jurisdiction, the official is immune even if the official intentionally, maliciously, or unreasonably violated the law or constitution. It would seem that if Ashli Babbitt's family is going to get past the hurdle of qualified immunity, they're going to have to show that no reasonable officer would have acted this way under similar circumstances. Alright, and my apologies for that rather abrupt change of scenery. It would appear that my wife and kids needed the office to go to a thrift shop. But as I was saying, I think the Babbitt family is going to have a very tough time overcoming that burden, that hurdle that is qualified immunity. I say that because I have now seen firsthand that we live in a world where everything has been politicized and weaponized to the point where we quite literally have one law, two systems. I do not want to compare the Ashli Babbitt situation to other incidents which are sufficiently different, but everyone can see it with their own two eyes. These situations have a way of working themselves around the politics. I think Ashli Babbitt's family has a very big hurdle to overcome, and I am not optimistic that they are going to be able to do it in a court of law. To be continued. I will definitely be following this case to the end, and if you like my videos, you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment in the comment section below because it feeds the algorithm.
Lois, who's the boss is not a food.
Swing and a miss.
If you want to support the channel, all of the support links are in the pinned comment. We've got PayPal, Patreon, subscribe to our YouTube membership. We've got merch, anti-media, because remember, the New York Times is trash. Robert Barnes and I do weekly live streams every Sunday. We do weekly streams every Wednesday with a guest called The Sidebar. Robert Barnes and I have a page on Locals. It is called
Viva Frei.locals.com.
All of my content is also on Rumble, so you can follow me there. But more important than any of that, take care of yourselves, check in on friends and family, make sure everyone around you is doing well, and now you know your vlog. Peace out.